So today we'd like to talk about the features of what would be the ideal primary wound dressing. So we think of things like being sterile, being bacteriostatic, and being inert. We want something that would be transparent so you can see wound progress, something that's odorless, something that's structurally and biologically stable. Thinking about it being easy and painless to apply and to remove. We want something that's suitable for different skin types and different locations, as well as different wounds. We'd want something to be full contact, so it's in full contact with the skin, and something that ideally would mimic intact skin. We want something that effectively reduces the acute inflammatory responses from things like lasers, and ideally it needs to be gas permeable. It needs to be hydrating, but not to be too hydrating as to macerate. We need something that's chemically stable and mechanically comparable with other secondary wound dressings, so to absorb exudate, for example. So in line with that, silicones are an excellent material. And we've been using silicones for many years, but with the new range of film-forming silicones, we have additional advantages from the gel-applied dressings. So features, for example, like the gels are bacteriostatic and they're inert, so they don't react with the body or with other mechanisms. We want something that's fast drying, so applied as a gel, but then dries to form a silicone gel sheet. Something that's gentle with its adhesion, so if, for example, if it's adhering to granulating tissue, but something that you can also remove quite easily. We want something that obviously is bacteriostatic and helps prevent infection. So the range of silicone gels that we have are specifically designed for different types of wounds and to be used in combination with secondary dressings or in circumstances where you just want a primary dressing, a full contact, gas permeable primary dressing. So some questions, I guess, for the guys here who have both been using the Stratamed and the Strata XRT or the Stratpharma range of products, including the Strata Mark. Just a little bit about your experience with the gels so far. So, for example, Stratamed, how long have you been working with the gels?
I'm Leonardo Marini from Trieste, Italy. I'm the medical director of the Skin Doctor Center of Trieste. And I've been using Stratamed since almost 5 years with great satisfaction, both on my side and on my patient side. We do a lot of surgical procedure with different kind of wounding agent, heat-producing wounding agent, cold steel wounding agent, and this kind of wounds behave differently. But they have something in common. We perturbate the equilibrium of the skin barrier anyway. And when we perturbate the equilibrium of the skin barrier, we want to have a dressing system, a primary dressing, which is able to reconstitute artificially this kind of barrier to decrease the transepidermal water loss, control it, decrease the post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, but we want something which is able to have 100% contact on this irregular surface. Yeah. This is what I like of this kind of silicone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Benedetto, could you
my name is Anthony Benedetto. I'm from Philadelphia in the United States. I'm the medical director of Dermatologic Surgery Center, and I've been using the Stratamed products for about a little over 2 years, maybe almost 3. I have been impressed by the way resistant wounds have healed within a matter of days or weeks. Wounds that I have had a lot of difficulty with in trying to heal them, especially on the scalp, and where they were resistant to re-epithelialization for over 2 years, with even after full thickness skin grafts and other types of wound healing promotive techniques as far as topical, excuse me, and oral antibiotics, topical steroids, and there have been wounds that have accumulated a lot of granulation tissue and seem to be resistant to reepithelialization.
And how much faster, or how fast do you see the results, or how would you quantify?
Well, a wound that was persistent and not healed and not reepithelialized for 2 years, and after 2 weeks to less than a month, it totally healed and reepithelialized, really meant something. It told us that something was not right prior to applying Stratamed, but yet it was normalized.
Yep.
Stratamed normalized the healing surface, and it allowed the skin, the epithelium, to just grow and
Yep.
connect over the wound.
So this is in a recalcitrant wound, a slow healing wound.
Yes.
But
Yes.
what about in maybe other dermatological procedures, surgeries, different types of lasers? What sort of experience do you have with the products?
With Stratamed, we can really be on the safe side because, as you said before, it's bacteriostatic, and it's sealing, protecting this wound, a surgical wound. So even if you have quite a dexterity and experience, you always have a little gap between the two edges of the wound. And I like to seal this kind of little gap with just a drop of Stratamed. This is protecting the delicate environment of a freshly made wound. Then on top of this, we put some Steri-strips, but Stratamed is just limited to the wound area. So we put a special glue around, which is able to stabilize the Steri-strip, and so that we don't touch the Stratamed.
So you apply right on the suture line.
All around.
Okay.
And then we put these Steri-strip, and we cover the wound with a normal dressing. I like to leave my wound under coverage for 7 to 10 days. I don't touch them. And this is why I like to be sure that I seal the entrance door to anything, bacteria and everything. And I must say that my patients, when we, as a surprise, we remove the dressing, they like it because it's perfect, fantastic.
Yep. So how would you maybe summarize the benefits that you see from applying the Stratamed as a gel, as opposed to what you would have used normally?
If you can make a comparison between an ointment and Stratamed. Usually in surgery we use ointment, and they're thick, and sometimes they macerate the tissue because ointments are not semi-permeable, so they are occlusive.
Yep.
So I prefer Stratamed because it's semi-permeable, and the film it forms, it's very thin.
Yep.
Then if you want, once the Stratamed is dry, you can put something on, like a antibiotic ointment, just a little bit,
Yes.
and then do the regular dressing, which is a secondary dressing.
Yes.
But
Now this is on top of
on top
of the Stratamed.
because this is just a precaution, and it's I'm not scared about allergies because it's semi-permeable. There is a film, but it's just to prevent some bacteria to enter.
But important to have that Stratamed as your first contact.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. Stratamed in every procedure, we know that if we are able to produce something, able to create a barrier, again, during this delicate time of the first healing, then this barrier is going to be beneficial to the healing process. So less irritation from the environment means a better healing process, faster.
Now, I have a little bit of a different technique where I have the patient change the dressing after 48 hours. We do cover the dressing exactly the way you just said. After the closure of the wound, we apply the Stratamed across the resected margins. But then after 48 hours, we have the patient remove the dressing and apply Stratamed twice a day and sort of wash the area in a regular, normal activity with the showering and things. And
So you have the Stratamed in the theatre with you, and then what? The patient takes that
yes,
with them. Yeah.
And then instead of using a topical antibiotic, where now there's a lot of contact dermatitis, a lot of problems with using different types of topical antibiotics, we give them the Stratamed, which is inert. It doesn't promote any bacterial growth, so it acts like an antibiotic.
Yep.
And it really hastens wound healing.
Yep.
It's amazing.
So in terms then maybe of the protocols that you had previously and what you're doing now, what changes? Just this first contact?
Just the topical ointment. Instead of an ointment, it's now a silicone gel. A silicone gel that's much more effective, and it just promotes the healing much better with less danger for contact dermatitis, less danger for irritation, but it promotes healing more so than any other type of contact antibacterial ointment that I've ever seen.
And using for incisions, for lasers, for...
Anywhere where there's no epithelium.
Exactly. Or when the epithelium is damaged. For example, if you use a IPL treatment, so you kind of micro-damage the epidermis.
Yes.
So you want to protect the epidermis, creating this kind of microfilm that separates this micro-damaged epidermis from the environment. If you use, for example, a Q-switch laser to remove a tattoo, excellent dressing, because we create this microfilm. If we use a fractional laser, then of course it depends how energetic you are.
Yes.
And how deep you want to go, because the healing process is different. If you do a freshening, let's say fractional laser to renovate the superficial layer of the skin, I use Stratamed. And I give Stratamed to my patient to repeat twice or even 3 times a day this Stratamed, because they feel kind of dry at the beginning. One thing they like is that they can move, because the film is very pliable. So it's like having an invisible second epithelium on top. And so they can talk, and in very different from the other dressing system, where they feel kind of tight. And this is very disturbing in the early phases of the healing process.
And the patients, do they have symptomatic relief? What do they experience from the gel?
They don't feel this warm effect of the Vaseline or that we usually use, because of the occlusion. Vaseline is occlusive, and Stratamed is semi-permeable.
Yes.
So they feel protected. They feel like normal skin. So a little bit of burning sensation due to the fact that, of course, the process was done, but they feel much better. And very important, very unique feeling after fractional radiofrequency, for example. If you put Stratamed immediately after the procedure, they feel relief.
Yeah.
Because it's sealing 100% the surface of the skin.
So even with your radiofrequency, where you're not creating or burning holes, it's still...
Of course, in fractional radiofrequency, you do something to the skin, but we have such an erythema.
Yes.
And what you can say also about Stratamed, that the erythema, the postoperative erythema, due to the fact that we are not creating an extra irritation, putting the skin in contact with the environment, then you have less erythema, which you can see after 24 hours or 48 hours.
Excellent.
Yeah, so, and I want to add to that, the erythema, that sometimes we use topical steroids, like with photodynamic therapy. It's another non-ablative way of rejuvenating the skin and eliminating precancerous changes and solar elastosis, which is skin damage. And we have done studies where we applied Stratamed on one half of the face, and we usually do it on the face, and then a very potent, the highest potent steroid on the opposite side of the face. And within the same amount of time, Stratamed has eliminated a lot of the itching, a lot of the burning, and it has helped with the desquamation just as well as or better than the class 6 topical clobetasol ointment. So it's as powerful as the strongest topical steroid on the market.
But inert and flexible, and it doesn't macerate, so the fluid doesn't build up underneath the sheet that it forms?
No, no. And it reduces, well, there's not too much oozing or tissue fluid loss, but and there's no bleeding, but there's desquamation. The skin is peeling off, there's sloughing,
Yes.
and it helps the sloughing, and it heals the new skin, the new epithelium, much faster than a sort of occlusive ointment like Vaseline in the clobetasol. It has a different aspect and a different healing process, and the patients feel it. They volunteer saying that it's less heat producing. The heat is not, or the sensation of heat and itching is not as severe as it is on the side where there's the topical steroid. So it's a soothing kind of healing process.
Great. So easy to use, comfortable for the patients, prevents infection, and it sounds like very utility-wise very well
Yes.
across many procedures.
Absolutely.
And you don't need much, because the spreadability of this device, medical device, is fantastic. Because silicone finds its way to resurface the skin
Yes.
in a unique way. Because the other primary dressing, they don't do this. You need to use a spatula, and you need to spread, and this is very irritating for the patient. So silicone is finding its own way. So it's very, very good.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your experience.
Our
thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank
you.
you. Okay, this video we are about to see, it's about lower lead laser assisted blepharoplasty and full face fraction resurfacing. In this case, we got two different areas treated differently with two different lasers. The periorbital area was treated with a CO2 full beam laser, and the fractional resurfacing was performed with the erbium YAG laser multipass. When you have a full de-epithelialization that you need to shrink the skin after lower lid blepharoplasty with the CO2, I prefer to use Strata XRT that can be applied to more sensitive areas due to the increased occlusivity of the formula. At the same time, I don't want to have that kind of occlusivity on the full face, and I use Stratamed, which is easily spreadable and very comfortable to the patient. What do you think, Nino, about this approach?
I think it's a great idea, especially with the Strata XRT on the eyelids. It's a lot more robust. It's a lot more protective. It enters the pores and the de-epithelialized skin in a much easier way, and it's bacteria static, so it won't promote any infection, and it will enhance the healing. So I think it's a wonderful approach.
Leonardo, I see here you're going very close to the eyes. You don't have any issues with the application so close to the eyes?
I'm not scared because actually the consistency of this kind of silicone gel allows me to be very, very precise in the distribution. And you can see that the patient is comfortable even if I'm using an applicator, because the applicator is sliding over the surface. Mm-hmm. And if something goes maybe into the eye, there is no problem at all, because this is inert. Mm-hmm. So I try not to, but I'm not scared.
So now you look like you're using a lot of Stratamed here on the other areas.
Yes, absolutely. This is immediately after the surgical procedure. So this is a particular time of the healing, so that we have an inflammatory process. The patient is kind of suffering, and I like to give this amount, which is only after surgery, because the skin needs to be pampered, and I need some extra, let's say, protection. But, and this is, you can see the patient 1 week post-op, you can see the difference between the area treated with the Stratamed and the Strata XRT. Okay, we are about to talk now about simple surgical excision with the absorbable intradermal suture technique. This is a surgical procedure that is cold still, so we don't warm the skin with any device. And what I like to do after this kind of procedure, I like to protect the wound from the irritation that may derive from the secondary dressing. So this is why I like to use Stratamed in a little drop on top of the surgical wound, just to seal the gap between the two areas of the skin that have been sutured. What I like to do, I like to apply Stratamed first, and then around a little strip of Stratamed, I put a epidermal glue, which allows me to use some Sterastrips. So the Sterastrips goes like a bridge on top of the Stratamed, but I can still have this kind of pulling on the skin, to protect the delicate area which has been sutured and from extra stressing. The other thing is that my approach then is to cover the area with a regular sterile gauze and leave the dressing as it is for 7 days, 8 days, 10 days, and I'm not scared to leave it, because I know that the surgical wound is perfectly protected.
So you're not changing the dressing, so one application of the Stratamed just at the surgery?
Yes.
And then what the patient would apply again when they changed after 7 days?
After 7 days, they continue with Stratamed, but very little, because the wound is still, the epidermis is sealed, but underneath we have the early, let's say, healing phase, and I don't want to disturb this delicate time. So I like to use Stratamed all around in order not to create an extra irritation that may cause a hypertrophic scar, a reaction, or even a post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. What is your approach, Nino?
Well, I was just going to say, my approach is that I have the patients change their dressings after 48 hours. So I start the dressing with Stratamed. I apply it, then do an occlusive dressing, gauze dressing over the resected margins, over the wound itself, and then I have the patients change it on a daily basis. But the value of Stratamed is that it doesn't interfere with the secondary dressing. You apply Stratamed like you would do any other kind of topical antibiotic, and it doesn't combat or it doesn't prevent an additional dressing for protection during the really important post-operative period.
So, Leonardo, here we're seeing that you've just applied the Stratamed directly and you're not waiting for that to dry? So it's not taking any extra downtime, or?
Absolutely no, because as you can see, I can put the strip on top like a bridge. So the dry area is at the periphery of the Stratamed, and I like the Stratamed to stay as it is because it's a fresh wound. I like to have, and my technique, I leave this for 7 days untouched. So maybe in the States the patients are much more reliable. In my country, I like to do the dressing myself and be responsible. The video we are about to see is about post-acne scar, fractional CO2, and full beam erbium YAG laser remodeling. So these are difficult cases because acne scars need to, for us to sculpt deeply, and these patients have a prolonged healing time, even if it's a fractional procedure. This is when we remove the wet dressing after 60 minutes post-op, and you can see the typical aspects of these patients. Then we apply an infrared LED just to stimulate the cells, and this is the application of Strata XR, yes, which is in this case something really needed because the irregularity of the surface and the wound, that thermal wound we did, require this kind of thickness of primary dressing.
What is the dressing? I forget. It's the Strata XRT?
Yes, Strata XRT. Yes, this is 24-hour post-op. And this is just with Strata XRT. So it's very comparable to a full, let's say, silicone sheet. So when you remove the silicone sheet, the patients look like this. And so this was just a film of Strata XRT.
And what is this white? Is this just gauze?
This is
not silicone.
No, it's just gauze. That's gauze. We after 24 hours, of course, we get some inevitable. We have some oozing, and we have some coagulation of the serum on top of the skin. So we need to clean it. I like to clean it, and in order for the Strata XRT to be in contact not with the scab, but with the actual healing skin.
So in that first 24 hours, that was not covered, was just Strata XRT, no secondary dressing, right?
No secondary dressing, yes. And this is very much appreciated by the patient because they can see through, because the advantage of this dressing is it's transparent. So they are not scared because I warned them before, and they can move. Due to the pliability of the silicone gel, we can really please the patient. The patient are happy because they don't feel this kind of pulling effect that is typical after this kind of procedure. What do you think, Nino?
I think the product XRT, because of its robustness, its denseness, is very protective. And now you've de-epithelialized and heated up the skin to such a point that it's very vulnerable. And I think this particular product is a nice way to protect the skin, prevent infection, and to promote healing.
So, Leonardo, this is still day one, and you're having a second application now after a cleaning.
No, this is after 24 hours.
Yes.
The skin is still oozing, and I like to apply more. Okay, the video is about multi-layer rejuvenation with the Q-switch, 532 laser, and photo peel. We are on the décolleté of a patient that's loved the sun too much. And this is the Q-switch, very gentle Q-switch, not more than 1.1 or 1.2 joule per centimeter square, 532 nanometers. And this is to remove just the superficial pigmented lesion like solar lentiginous. After this, we apply the regular transparent gel just before the IPL. Which is going to refine what we did with the Q-switch laser. It's a very common procedure, very much requested by patients. We perform it regularly, and I'm very happy to have something able to cover very well these extensive surfaces. So the silicone gel we use, it's again an excellent primary dressing because we don't need much. The patient feel comfortable immediately after this kind of procedure, and believe it or not, they feel an immediate relief after the application of Stratamed. Why? Because Stratamed is 100%, let's say, spreadable silicone gel, which is contouring or recontouring the epidermis, the wounded epidermis, in an excellent way. What do you think, Nina, about...
Well, I think you're right, because this is my favorite dressing. I do IPL, and we apply Stratamed over the area, and the patients immediately are more comfortable than when we did the IPL without using Stratamed. We sometimes didn't really understand what we needed to apply, so we would put a topical steroid, a relatively potent topical steroid, and Stratamed is just as effective, but I think it's more healing. It promotes healing better than a topical steroid. We've done one side with a potent topical steroid and the other side with Stratamed, and invariably the patients say they're more comfortable. There's less heat production. Their skin cools off more rapidly, faster in a day or two. There's less itching, and there's a visible promotion of healing and satisfaction by the patient.
As you can see here, at the end of the IPL, we did a chemical peel, 15% TCA, just as a finishing effect. And you can imagine that after this kind of micro wounding of the epidermis, we need something able to seal the epidermis from the environment. And nothing better than a good spreadable thin film of silicone gel.
So before you applied the Stratamed there, what cleaning protocol did you have? You cleaned what?
With just normal saline.
Normal saline.
Normal saline,
yep.
Yes.
And then Stratamed straight on top.
Straight on top, as you can see. And you see the spreadability is fantastic. And what it is very important to say that even if you touch the patient with your gloves, the patient tolerates that because the contact is not rubbing, is sliding. So this video is about stretch mark treatment with fractional radiofrequency and 15% TCA chemical peel immediately after. Stretch marks are very difficult to treat, but with radiofrequency we can have some good results. This is just cleaning and the skin, and it's with the radiofrequency, the fractional radiofrequency. What we do, we pierce the skin with microneedling, and we allow the electricity to travel in the dermis in order to warm the dermis and to create this thermal effect, which is going to be able to remodel the area. As you can see here, this is a contact procedure. We need to be in contact with the skin to press the microneedle into the skin. So it's a micro wounding effect, but it's creating a lot of edema. It's creating a lot of redness, which is building up, with
with time. You can see that this surface needs to be protected with something, and nothing better than using a very nice silicone film, and this time we use the stretch mark prevention Stratamark, which is a silicone which has a different kind of consistency, and also stimulates the area to heal faster and to remodel better. What do you think, Nino, about this approach?
I think this is the perfect agent, the silicone gel for stretch marks. It has a consistency that will help promote the healing of the stretch marks after the radiofrequency treatment. But also, because you're using the 15% TCA peel, you've disrupted the epithelial border or bounder. A barrier, I'm sorry, the barrier has now been interrupted, and this Stratamark has is the consistency and the robustness of this particular product is just right for the combination of treatments that you just done.
And at this point, the patient is very irritated. They start to complain to the point that it's very irritated. So immediately after this maneuver, when you start to spread the silicone, they feel an immediate relief, and they like it immediately. It is very nice because this procedure needs to be repeated. So you need to give the patients some kind of comfort at the end of the procedure so that they can come back with more happy than being touched.
Well, there's a lot of erythema, so I think this Stratamark reduces the erythema of your procedure.